We often hear about second chances, and while grace and forgiveness are powerful, it's crucial to know when a second chance is actually doing more harm than good. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, we must reflect deeply before deciding to rebuild it. Let's explore why it's sometimes necessary to walk away, to hold our boundaries firm, and to choose our own self-worth over the illusion of harmony. Trust is one of the most fundamental aspects of any relationship. It's the glue that holds us together, whether we're talking about our families, friendships, or even the professional environments we operate in. Yet, so often we misunderstand what trust really is. Many of us treat it like a blanket we can hand out freely, expecting that it will always be returned whole. But trust is much more fragile than we realize. It's not something we can give out lightly. And once broken, it takes time, effort, and intentionality to rebuild. Trust is not a right, but something that must be earned. In a culture that promotes forgiveness and second chances, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that trust is not the same as forgiveness. You can forgive someone without giving them a second chance. Forgiveness is about releasing the anger, bitterness, and hurt from your heart. It's something you do for yourself. But trust, on the other hand, is about safety. It's about knowing that the person who hurt you is committed to changing their behavior and rebuilding what they've broken. Trust isn't something you owe someone just because you've forgiven them. It must be earned brick by brick through consistent action. Many of us struggle with this because we confuse kindness with giving people endless chances. We want to be seen as good, forgiving, compassionate. We've been taught that giving someone the benefit of the doubt, even when they've let us down, is a sign of grace. But here's the hard truth. Continually giving someone a second chance when they haven't earned it isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. When someone breaks your trust, they aren't just letting you down in the moment. They're telling you that your boundaries don't matter, that your vulnerability doesn't need to be protected, and that your well-being is negotiable. Trust is built in small moments, not grand gestures. It's in the everyday acts of reliability, honesty, and care. It's when someone follows through on their word, when they show up for you, not just when it's convenient, but when it's difficult. It's when they respect your boundaries, honor your feelings, and make you feel safe in your vulnerability. These are the moments that add up over time, creating a foundation of trust that makes us feel secure in our relationships. But just as trust is built in small moments, it can also be broken in a single act of betrayal. When someone betrays our trust, it's not just about the action they took, it's about the violation of safety. It's about the fact that we opened ourselves up to them, allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, and they showed us that they weren't willing to protect that vulnerability. This is why betrayal hurts so much. It's not just the lie, the broken promise, or the missed opportunity. It's that we trusted someone with our hearts, and they showed us that we weren't safe. It's important to understand that when trust is broken, it's not your job to fix it. It's not up to you to bend over backward to make things right or to smooth over the cracks in the relationship. Trust must be earned by the person who broke it. They have to be willing to take accountability for their actions, to genuinely apologize without excuses, and to show through consistent behavior that they are committed to rebuilding what's been lost. And even then, it's your choice whether or not you want to allow that trust to be rebuilt. You are under no obligation to give someone a second chance just because they say they're sorry. When someone breaks our trust, we often feel pressure to forgive and forget. We think that in order to move forward, we have to pretend like the betrayal didn't happen. But that's not what real trust looks like. Real trust is not about sweeping things under the rug or pretending everything is fine. Real trust is about doing the hard work of healing, of setting boundaries, and of holding people accountable for their actions. If someone has hurt you, they have to earn their way back into your life, not through words, but through action. Forgiveness is about letting go of the anger and resentment that's weighing you down, but that doesn't mean you have to let the person who hurt you back into your life in the same way. Trust is different. Trust about safety, reliability, and the assurance that the person who hurt you understands the weight of their actions and is committed to change. If someone isn't willing to do that work, then it's okay to withhold your trust. It's okay to protect yourself. One of the most important lessons we can learn about trust is that it's not about other people. It's about us. It's about what we need to feel safe, valued, and respected. When we give our trust too freely, when we allow people to hurt us without holding them accountable, we are betraying ourselves. We are saying that our feelings, our boundaries, and our well-being don't matter as much as maintaining the relationship. But here's the truth: the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. And if you can't trust yourself to protect your own heart, how can you expect anyone else to? This is why boundaries are so crucial in any relationship. Boundaries aren't about punishing others, they're about protecting ourselves. They're about making sure that we don't give more than we have to give, that we don't allow others to take advantage of our kindness, and that we don't lose ourselves in the process of trying to please others. Setting boundaries is an act of self-love, and it's essential for building and maintaining trust. If someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, it's a sign that they don't respect you. And if they don't respect you, how can you trust them? We all deserve to have relationships where we feel safe, valued, and respected. We deserve to be surrounded by people who honor our boundaries, who show up when they say they will, and who protect our vulnerability. And if someone isn't willing to do that, then they don't deserve our trust. Trust is earned, not given. And the people who truly value you will be willing to do the work to earn it. They will show up for you day after day, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones that matter most. Trust is one of the most fragile and essential components of our lives. It's something we crave, something we need to feel secure and connected to those around us. But what we sometimes forget is that trust is not something that should ever be taken for granted or given away freely. Trust is a sacred contract, and every time we give it to someone, we are making an emotional investment in that relationship. It's important to understand that this investment carries a significant weight and must be nurtured with care. The reality is that trust is built over time through consistent actions, through the everyday moments when someone shows up for you, when they keep their word, when they honor your boundaries, and when they treat you with respect. It's not built on grand gestures or superficial promises. Trust grows in the quiet moments when someone listens to you without judgment, when they remember the little things that matter to you, and when they show over and over again that they can be relied on. One of the most difficult truths we all face is that trust can be shattered in an instant. Years of careful trust building can be undone with a single act of betrayal. Whether it's a lie, a broken promise, or a violation of boundaries, the pain of having your trust broken can be devastating. It feels like the ground has been ripped out from under you, like everything you thought was solid and secure is suddenly unstable and uncertain. What's even harder to accept is that once broken, trust is incredibly difficult to rebuild. It's not impossible, but it requires an immense amount of effort, patience, and commitment from both parties. It's not enough for the person who broke your trust to simply say, "I'm sorry, apologies are important, but they are just the beginning." What really matters is whether the person is willing to take responsibility for their actions, whether they are committed to changing the behavior that led to the broken trust, and whether they are ready to do the hard work of earning back your trust over time. Rebuilding trust isn't just about the other person, though. It's also about you. It's about whether you feel ready and willing to open yourself up to that vulnerability again. Because let's be honest, your trust has been broken. Opening yourself back up to that person feels like a huge emotional risk. You've been hurt before, and the fear of being hurt again is real. You may want to trust them, you may even believe in their intentions, but there's always that little voice in the back of your mind asking, what if it happens again? This is why it's so important to honor your feelings and to listen to your gut. If your intuition is telling you that you're not ready to trust this person again, it's okay to hold off. You are under no obligation to rush back into a relationship or to give someone a second chance just because they've apologized or because you love them. Love and trust are two different things. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that they are not in a place where they can be trusted. It's also important to recognize that trust isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. It's not something that either exists or doesn't. Trust operates on a spectrum, and it's okay to adjust your level of trust based on someone's behavior. Maybe you're willing to trust them with certain aspects of your life, but not others. Maybe you trust them enough to maintain a friendship, but not enough to share your deepest, most vulnerable feelings. These are decisions only you can make based on what feels right for you. Out of the greatest challenges in life is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And when trust is broken, we often find ourselves in this difficult place of trying to decide whether it's worth giving the relationship another chance or whether it's time to walk away. There's no easy answer to this, but what I can tell you is this: you don't owe anyone your trust. It doesn't matter how long you've known them, how much you care about them, or how much they may want to make things right. Trust must be earned. And if someone has shown you that they are unwilling or unable to earn it, then it's okay to let them go. Letting go is not a failure. In fact, it can be one of the most courageous and self-respecting things you can do. Walking away from a relationship that no longer serves you, that no longer honors your boundaries or values, is an act of self-love. It's a recognition that you deserve to be surrounded by people who treat your trust as the precious and valuable thing that it is. What we often forget is that trust is a reflection of our own self-worth. When we continue to give our trust to people who repeatedly break it, we are sending a message to ourselves that our boundaries don't matter, that our feelings don't matter, and that we are willing to tolerate being hurt. But you are worth more than that. You are worth relationships that are built on a foundation of mutual respect, honesty, and care. You are worth being with people who value your trust and who work hard to earn it. Sometimes we find ourselves in a style of giving people second, third, or even fourth chances because we believe in their potential. We see the good in them, we want to believe that they will change, and we hold on to hope that they will one day become the person we need them to be. But here's the thing: trust isn't about potential, it's about actions. It's about who someone is right now, not who they might become. It's easy to fall into the trap of hoping that someone will change, but hope isn't enough to build trust. Consistent, reliable actions are what build trust. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. Many people think of it as weakness or naivety, an act of exposing ourselves to be hurt, rejected, or misunderstood. But vulnerability is not about being naive or unguarded. It's about showing up with our whole selves, with all our imperfections, and saying, "This is who I am." It takes immense courage to be vulnerable, and that courage is not rooted in the hope that we'll always be received with open arms, but in the understanding that being authentic, being real, is worth the risk. We live in a world that often tells us to put on armor, to be tough, to hide our soft spots. We're encouraged to present a polished version of ourselves to the world, the version that looks like we have everything together, like we're always strong, always capable. But underneath that polished exterior, we're all carrying fears, doubts, and insecurities. We all have moments where we feel small, moments where we wonder if we're enough, moments where we desperately want to connect with others, but are terrified of being seen for who we really are. And this is where vulnerability comes in. It's the willingness to take off the armor and allow ourselves to be seen even when it feels incredibly risky. The truth is, vulnerability is not a weakness. It's one of the greatest acts of bravery we can engage in. It requires us to step into uncertainty and to embrace the unknown. When we are vulnerable, we are putting the line. We are saying, "I care about this, this matters to me, I want to be seen." And the reality is, yes, sometimes we will get hurt. Sometimes when we open up and show our true selves, people won't respond the way we hope they will. Sometimes we will be met with judgment, rejection, or indifference, but that doesn't mean we've made a mistake in being vulnerable. It means we've been courageous enough to be real. Courage and vulnerability are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. To be courageous is to step into vulnerability, to be willing to risk exposure, and to trust that whatever happens, you'll be okay. The courage to be vulnerable comes from a deep belief in our own worthiness. It's the understanding that no matter what anyone else says or does, we are enough just as we are. We are worthy of love, connection, and belonging, even when we're not perfect, even when we mess up, and even when we're afraid. What makes vulnerability so powerful is that it's the birthplace of connection. True, meaningful connection cannot happen without vulnerability. We can't form deep, authentic relationships if we're hiding behind a mask. If we're always putting up a front, always pretending to be something we're not, then the connections we form will be superficial at best. It's only when we're willing to let others see us, the real us, that we can form the kind of bonds that sustain us and bring joy, love, and purpose into our lives. But here's the thing, vulnerability doesn't guarantee that we'll always be met with kindness or acceptance. Being vulnerable doesn't mean that everyone will understand us or that we'll never get hurt. Vulnerability comes with risk, and that's part of what makes it so scary. When we open ourselves up, we are exposing ourselves to the possibility of rejection, disappointment, and heartbreak. But what we often forget is that the alternative, closing ourselves off, hiding behind walls, and pretending we don't care, comes with its own set of risks. When we refuse to be vulnerable, we might protect ourselves from pain, but we also cut ourselves off from love, joy, and connection. Living a life devoid of vulnerability might feel safer, but it's a hollow kind of safety. It's the kind of safety that keeps us isolated, disconnected, and lonely. It's a kind of steady that might protect us from getting hurt, but also keeps us from truly living. Because here's the truth, vulnerability is where life happens. It's where we experience the fullness of our humanity. It's where we love deeply, connect authentically, and find meaning in our relationships. Yes, vulnerability can hurt, but it's also where joy is born. It's where creativity thrives. It's where we experience the true beauty of life. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we are giving ourselves permission to be human. We are acknowledging that we are not perfect, that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes we struggle. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's what makes us relatable. It's what makes us real. When we show up with our imperfections and our fears, we give others permission to do the same. We create a space where real connection can happen, where people can meet us not as perfect beings, but as fellow humans who are also navigating the messiness of life. It's important to remember that vulnerability is not about oversharing or exposing every part of ourselves to everyone. Vulnerability is about discernment. It's about knowing who has earned the right to hear your story and to see your heart. It's about choosing carefully who you open up to, not because you're afraid of getting hurt, but because you recognize that your vulnerability is a gift. You don't owe your vulnerability to everyone. Not everyone deserves to see your most tender parts. Vulnerability requires trust, and trust must be earned. But here's the thing. When you do find those people who have earned your trust, those people who will hold your vulnerability with care, the rewards are immeasurable. You'll find a depth of connection and intimacy that is only possible through vulnerability. You'll experience relationships where you feel truly seen and valued for who you are, not for the mask you wear or the facade you present. And that kind of connection is worth the risk. The biggest myth about vulnerability is that it makes us weak. But the reality is that it takes incredible strength to be vulnerable. It takes strength to stand in your truth, to show up as you are, and to risk being seen. It takes strength to share your story, to let others into your world, and to trust that you will be okay, no matter how they respond. Vulnerability is not about being naive or careless with your heart. It's about being brave enough to put your heart out there, knowing full well that you might get hurt, but choosing to do it anyway, because you believe in the power of connection. One of the reasons we fear vulnerability is because we're afraid of judgment. We're afraid that if we show people who we really are, they won't accept us. They'll see our flaws, our insecurities, and our weaknesses, and they'll judge us for them. But here's the truth: everyone has insecurities. Everyone has flaws. Everyone struggles. When we hide our vulnerabilities, we're not protecting ourselves from judgment. We're just preventing ourselves from forming real connections. The people who matter, the people who truly love and care about you, won't judge you for being vulnerable. They'll appreciate your honesty and your courage, and they'll feel closer to you because of it. It's also important to recognize that vulnerability doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. Sometimes we'll be vulnerable and it won't go the way hoped. Sometimes we'll share something personal and the other person won't respond the way we need them to. That's part of the risk of vulnerability, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try again. It doesn't mean we should shut down and stop being vulnerable altogether. It just means we need to be mindful of who we're being vulnerable with and to trust that even when things don't go perfectly, we're still okay. Vulnerability is a practice. It's something we have to choose every day in small moments and big ones. It's in the little acts of honesty, the times when we say, I don't know, or I'm struggling, or I need help. It's in the moments when we choose to share a piece of ourselves with someone else, even when it feels scary. And the more we practice vulnerability, the more we build our capacity for courage. The more we show up as our true selves, the more we learn that we are enough just as we are. We often think that vulnerability is about being soft, about lowering our defenses. But vulnerability is about being brave. It's about having the courage to show up and be seen even when we're afraid. It's about knowing that we are worthy of love and belonging, not because we're perfect, but because we are human. And being human means being vulnerable. It means acknowledging our imperfections, our fears, and our insecurities, and choosing to show up anyway. Vulnerability is not naivety. It's not about being reckless with our hearts or exposing ourselves to harm. It's about being brave enough to be real, to let others see us as we are, and to trust that no matter what happens, we are enough. It's about knowing that the rewards of vulnerability, connection, love, intimacy are worth the risk. And it's about trusting that even when we get hurt, even when things don't go the way we plan, we are resilient enough to keep going. Shame is a powerful emotion. It's the voice in our head that tells us we're not good enough, that we don't belong, that we're flawed in some fundamental way. Shame makes us believe that if people really knew who we were, they would reject us. It isolates us, makes us hide, and keeps us from showing up as our true selves. Shame is a universal feeling, yet it thrives in secrecy and silence. The moment we give it space, the moment we let it live within us, it grows. But the moment we name it, the moment we bring it into the light, its power diminishes. When we're caught in the grips of shame, we tell ourselves stories about how we are not worthy of love, not deserving of connection, not enough in some way. These stories can shape how we see ourselves and how we move through the world. They can keep us small, afraid, and disconnected from the very things that make life meaningful. Shame convinces us that we are alone in our struggles, that no one else could possibly understand what we're going through. But here's the truth: shame is a liar. It's a master manipulator, and it's not based in reality. The thing about shame is that it feeds off our silence. The more we keep it hidden, the more control it has over us. But shame cannot survive being spoken out loud. It can't thrive in the light of vulnerability and connection. When we find the courage to name our shame, to speak it out loud, we take its power away. We create space for empathy, understanding, and connection. And we remind ourselves that we are not alone, that we are not broken, and that we are worthy of love and belonging. What we have to remember is that shame is not the same as guilt. Guilt is the feeling that we've done something wrong, that our actions don't align with our values. Guilt can be productive. It can motivate us to change, to make amends, to grow. Shame, on the other hand, tells us that we are wrong, that we are inherently flawed. While guilt is about behavior, shame is about identity. And when we allow shame to take root in our identity, it can erode our sense of self-worth. It can make us feel like we are unworthy of love, of belonging, of happiness. But that's not the truth. The truth is we are all worthy no matter our mistakes or imperfections. One of the most insidious things about shame is that it often masquerades as protection. We tell ourselves that by hiding the parts of us we feel ashamed of, we're protecting ourselves from judgment, from rejection, from hurt. But in reality, shame doesn't protect us, it isolates us. It keeps us from connecting with others, from being fully present in our relationships, from showing up authentically in our lives. And here's the hard truth. The more we try to protect ourselves with shame, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from ourselves. Shame thrives in cultures of perfectionism. When we feel like we have to be perfect in order to be worthy, shame is always lurking just beneath the surface. The fear of making mistakes, of being found out, of not measuring up, that's where shame lies. But perfectionism is a myth. There is no such thing as a perfect person, a perfect life, or a perfect path. And chasing perfection only leads to exhaustion, anxiety, and disconnection. We are not meant to be perfect. We are meant to be human. And being human means being imperfect. It means making mistakes, learning, growing, and showing up anyway. When we let go of perfectionism, we make room for self-compassion. We give ourselves permission to be flawed, to be vulnerable, to be real. Self-compassion is the antidote to shame. It's the voice that says, you made a mistake, but you're still worthy. It's the understanding that we are not our mistakes and that our worth is not contingent on being perfect. Self-compassion allows us to meet ourselves with kindness, to extend the same grace to ourselves that we would offer to someone we love. And in doing so, we create a space where shame cannot thrive. Another way shame shows up in our lives is through comparison. We look at others and think they have it all together. They're doing better than I am. Why can't I be more like them? But comparison is a thief of joy. It takes us out of our own experience and makes us believe that we're not enough. But here's the thing. Everyone has their own struggles, their own insecurities, their own battles with shame. No one's life is as perfect as it may seem from the outside. And the more we focus on comparing ourselves to others, the more disconnected we become from our own worth. Shame also tells us that we have to go it alone. It tells us that we can't let anyone see our struggles, that we have to handle everything on our own, that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But the truth is, we were never meant to do this alone. We are wired for connection. We are meant to be in relationships where we can lean on each other, where we can share our burdens, where we can offer and receive support. When we open up to others, when we share our struggles, we create space for connection and empathy. And in those moments, shame loses its grip on us. One of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is the willingness to be vulnerable, to show up as we are, and to let go of the fear of judgment. Vulnerability is not about oversharing or putting ourselves in harm's way. It's about being honest with ourselves and with others about what we're feeling, what we're struggling with, and what we need. It's about trusting that we are enough just as we are, and that we don't have to hide our imperfections in order to be worthy of love and belonging. Shame often tells us that vulnerability is dangerous, that if we let people see who we really are, they will reject us. But the truth is, vulnerability is the pathway to connection. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we create space for real, meaningful relationships. We give others permission to be vulnerable with us, and we create a culture of empathy and understanding. The vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage. It's the willingness to show up and be seen, even when it feels risky, even when we're afraid. Shame has no place in our lives because shame is based on a lie. It tells us that we are not enough, that we are unworthy, that we are flawed beyond repair. But the truth is, we are all worthy of love, connection, and belonging exactly as we are. We don't have to earn our worth. We don't have to be perfect to be deserving of love. We are enough right now in this moment. And when we embrace that truth, when we let go of the story shame has been telling us, we free ourselves to live authentically, to connect deeply, and to experience the fullness of life. In order to move beyond shame, we must cultivate resilience. We must learn to recognize shame when it shows up in our lives and to call it out for what it is, a false narrative. Shame resilience doesn't mean that we'll never feel shame again. Shame is a part of being human, but it does mean that we can learn to navigate it, to move through it, and to not let it control us. We can learn to speak our shame, to share it with others, and to recognize that we are not alone in our experiences. Shame also tries to tell us that we need to hide, that our vulnerability will be met with rejection or judgment. But what we often find is that when we share our vulnerabilities, we are met with understanding, compassion, and connection. People are drawn to authenticity. They are moved by honesty. When we allow ourselves to be seen as we are, we create space for deeper, more meaningful relationships. We give others permission to be themselves as well, and we build a culture of trust and empathy. One of the most important things we can do to combat shame is to surround ourselves with people who see us for who we are and love us anyway. We need relationships where we can show up, imperfections and all, and still feel accepted. We need people in our lives who will remind us of our worth when shame tries to tell us otherwise. These relationships are crucial to our well-being, and they are built on a foundation of vulnerability and trust. Ultimately, shame has no place in our lives because it is not based in truth. The truth is, we are all flawed, imperfect, and human. We all make mistakes, we all struggle, and we are all worthy of love and belonging. We don't need to be perfect to be enough. We don't need to hide our vulnerabilities to protect ourselves. We are enough exactly as we are, and when we embrace that truth, we free ourselves from the grip of shame. Shame thrives in secrecy, but when we bring it into the light, it loses its power. When we share our stories, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we create a space for connection and empathy. We remind ourselves and others that we are not alone in our struggles. We are all in this together, and that we are all worthy of love and belonging. Shame has no place here because we are enough just as we are. As we come to the end of this reflection on second chances, it's important to remember that protecting your heart, your energy, and your peace is not an act of cruelty. It's an act of self-respect. When someone shows you who they truly are, when they betray your trust or disrespect your boundaries, it's not your job to keep giving them opportunities to hurt you again. You have the power to decide who deserves to be in your life and who doesn't. Don't give people a second chance to repeat the same mistakes, to inflict the same pain, or to show the same disregard for your worth. It's not about being unforgiving or bitter. It's about recognizing that your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being are valuable. People who take advantage of your kindness, who mistreat you, or who refuse to honor the respect you give them do not deserve a second chance to do it again. Your boundaries are not negotiable, and your self-worth is non-negotiable. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. Honor that relationship by refusing to allow people back into your life who have proven that they do not deserve a place in it. Trust yourself enough to walk away from anyone who doesn't value you and believe in your right to live a life free from the hurt caused by repeated mistakes. You deserve people in your life who lift you up, who see your value, and who treat you with the love and respect you give to others. But don't waste time on those who don't. Be strong enough to know when to walk away and be brave enough to believe that you deserve better. Your peace is worth more than any second chance.